I was standing in line at a coffee shop in downtown Denver, half frozen from the wind blowing in every time the door opened, when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made me do a double take, Wes Carter. I hadn't heard from Wes in almost 4 years, not since college graduation when we both promised to stay in touch, which obviously meant following each other on Instagram and occasionally liking posts. So why was the cowboy from my past calling me 2 weeks before Christmas? Curiosity got the better of me. Hello? Hey, Eli? You got a second? That voice. It still had that slow Texas drawl, rough around the edges, but somehow smooth, like a shot of good bourbon. I hadn't heard it in years, and yet it landed like no time had passed. Yeah? What's up? There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to make it awkward. I need a favor, I laughed. Of course you do. Serious one, he added. I stepped out of line and moved to the side, suddenly more interested in this than in overpriced lattes. All right, shoot. So my ex is throwing a Christmas party. Big one. Whole town's gonna be there. Her family, my family, old friends, co-workers, everyone. Okay. And she's bringing her fiancé. Now I was intrigued, still not seeing how this is my problem. I need a date, I blinked. A date, as in, you want me to go with you? As in, pretend to be my boyfriend for one night, he said, not even flinching. I let out a short laugh. You're not serious. Dead serious. Wes, you're the straightest man I've ever known who wore a Stetson unironically. Things change, he said, and it was quiet. Besides, you always cleaned up nice. I didn't know how to respond to that. I'll pay for everything, he continued. Flight, hotel, rental. Hell, I'll throw in a new coat if you need one. I hesitated. The idea was ridiculous. I hadn't been back to Texas since I moved, and the thought of parading around as the date of the guy who used to wrestle cattle and drink Coors Light for fun sounded like a fever dream. But also, it sounded like exactly the kind of distraction I needed. All right, I said, before I could talk myself out of it. When's the party? Wes picked me up from the airport in his dusty red pickup, wearing jeans, boots, and a flannel like he was fresh off the set of a ranch-themed Netflix series. He hadn't changed much. Same scruffy beard, same piercing blue eyes, same confident swagger that used to make people move out of his way. Still drive this old thing? I said, sliding into the passenger seat. She's reliable, he said with a grin. Kinda like you. I gave him a side eye. You mean sarcastic and slightly judgmental? He shrugged, and easy on the eyes. I turned away so he wouldn't see me blush. The plan was simple. Attend the party, pretend to be his boyfriend, and leave before anyone got too nosy. What I didn't plan for was how natural it felt. Wes, who used to dodge any hint of emotion like it was a bullet, suddenly had his arm around my waist, his hand resting casually on my back, whispering things into my ear that made me forget it was all for show. He introduced me to his ex, Harper, like I was the best thing that ever happened to him. This is Eli, he said with that charming drawl. We met back in college, lost touch, found each other again last summer. She looked me up and down with the kind of smile that was more challenge than courtesy. Well, she said sweetly, he's definitely an upgrade. I didn't know whether to be flattered or offended. But Wes? He just laughed and squeezed my hand. Yeah, I know. Later that night, after the small talk and spiked cider, we found ourselves alone on the back porch, the cold biting through our coats. You're good at this, I said, sipping from a mug. This whole boyfriend act? He looked at me then, long and hard. Who said I was acting? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Wes took a step closer, close enough that I could smell the cedarwood cologne he always wore. I never really stopped thinking about you, he said. I just didn't know how to say it back then. The snow started falling then, soft and silent around us. And maybe it was the whiskey or the holiday lights glowing through the window. But something about that moment made my heart twist. You're not just trying to one-up your ex, are you? I asked. No, he said quietly. I just realized too late who I really wanted to bring home. And then he kissed me. And just like that, it wasn't pretend anymore. The kiss wasn't hesitant. It wasn't one of those light testing pecks that came with a nervous laugh or an awkward apology. No, Wes kissed me like he meant it, like he'd thought about it 100 times and finally stopped giving a damn. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, maybe 10. Long enough for me to forget where we were, long enough to feel every inch of tension he'd been holding in since I stepped off that plane. When he finally pulled back, his breath lingered in the cold air, his eyes never leaving mine. Wes, I started. You don't have to say anything, he interrupted. I just needed to do that. Been thinking about it since college. I searched his face, trying to figure out if this was still part of the performance, some last-ditch ego thing to stick it to his ex. But there was no smirk, no smugness in his expression. Just something raw, real. You said this was pretend, I said slowly. I lied, he admitted. At first it was, but then you showed up looking like that and… Shit, Eli. I didn't think you'd actually come. Neither did I. We stood in silence for a beat too long, the sound of Christmas music drifting faintly from the house. I don't know what this is, I said finally. You can't just surprise me with a kiss and expect everything to fall into place. I know, he said, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets now, eyes cast down like he was scared of the answer. But I had to try. I should have said something years ago. The porch light flickered overhead. I looked at him, really looked at him, and suddenly the memories came flooding back. Late night beers on the dorm balcony. Road trips with too much gas station food. The way he used to glance at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Maybe I wasn't imagining those looks after all. You're not doing this just to get back at Harper? No, he said instantly. She doesn't matter. Not like you do. My chest tightened. All right, I said. Let's see where this goes. Back inside, the energy shifted. His hand in mine felt different now. No longer part of a bit, but a real connection. People noticed, too. His cousins raised eyebrows. His aunt pulled me aside to say I had soft eyes. And Harper? She watched us from across the room like she didn't know what to make of it. Wes leaned down at one point and whispered, I think we're stealing the spotlight. Wasn't that the plan? He smirked. The plan changed. Later, we slow danced in the living room while someone played a country version of a Christmas song on a beat-up guitar. I kept expecting the moment to break. For someone to say something crude. For Wes to flinch or pull away. But he didn't. If anything, he held me closer. I feel like I'm dreaming, he said quietly into my ear. Try pinching yourself. I'd rather kiss you again. And he did. That night, back at his ranch house, we sat on the couch under a blanket, the fire crackling in front of us. I was scared, he said, after a long stretch of silence. Of what? That I messed it up, that maybe I waited too long. I thought about it for a moment. You did, but I came anyway. He looked at me, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. Why? I shrugged. Maybe I was hoping you'd finally stop pretending. His hand found mine again. I'm done pretending. I expected it to feel awkward the next morning. You know how sometimes things happen at night. Kisses, confessions, promises whispered in the glow of firelight. And then daylight comes, and it all feels like a dream you're embarrassed to remember. But when I woke up on the pull-out couch, stiff and tangled in the world's scratchiest flannel blanket, Wes was already in the kitchen. Shirtless, making coffee. He glanced over his shoulder and grinned like I hadn't just agreed to fake date him into an emotional minefield. Hope you like it strong, he said, holding up a chipped ceramic mug with Best Dad Ever printed on the side. Unless you've been keeping a kid's secret from me, I'm calling bluff on that mug, I muttered, stretching. Nah, he said with a shrug. Got it in a gift exchange at work. Figured it's good for throwing people off. He handed me the mug, and our fingers brushed. Still electric. Still real. I slept like crap, I said, taking a sip. Your couch is older than my student loans. You could have shared the bed, he said casually, pouring himself a cup. It's big enough. Right, because that wouldn't be weird. He leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee like it was the easiest thing in the world. Only if you still think this is all pretend. I stared at him. You're serious, aren't you? He met my eyes, steady and unflinching. Yeah, I am. Later that morning, we went to the local diner for breakfast. One of those places where the walls are covered in faded photos of Little League teams from the 90s, and everyone knows everyone else's business. And by later, I mean 8 a.m., because apparently, Cowboys wake up at the crack of dawn no matter what. The second we walked in, all eyes turned. I could practically feel the whispers. That Wes Carter? Heard he brought a boyfriend to Harper's party. Heard he kissed him right there in the middle of the room. Wes didn't flinch. He walked in like he always had, a quiet confidence that dared anyone to try him. And me? I tried not to overthink it. Tried not to shrink under the weight of people's stares. We slid into a booth, and he ordered eggs and sausage, like nothing was out of the ordinary. You ever get tired of being watched? I asked, glancing around at the diner full of curious eyes. Used to it, he said, sipping from his water. Small towns never forget. Yeah, well, they're definitely not forgetting this anytime soon. You regret coming? He asked, voice quieter now. I looked at him, at the way he picked at the corner of his napkin, his shoulders tense despite his relaxed expression. No, I said. I just didn't think you'd be okay with everyone knowing. I'm not, he admitted, but I'm okay with them knowing about you. And that shut me up real quick. After breakfast, we stopped at the feed store, because apparently cows don't take days off, and Wes had to grab supplies for the ranch. I waited in the truck while he talked to the guy behind the counter, who looked like he'd stepped straight out of a Wrangler ad. Through the windshield, I saw them talking, laughing, even. Then the guy clapped Wes on the back and gave me a long look. Great. When Wes climbed back in, he handed me a bottle of orange soda. Heard you used to drink this all the time in college. I blinked. You remember that? He shrugged. I remember a lot more than I let on. There was something about the way he said it that made my throat tighten. What are we doing, Wes? He didn't answer right away. I don't know, he said finally. I just know I want you here. And not just for show. That night, we skipped the town bar, even though I could tell he was itching to prove a point. Instead, we stayed in, curled up on the couch again, this time both of us under the same blanket. My head on his shoulder, his arm around me like it belonged there. And for once, no pretending, no performance, just him, me, and a crackling fire we didn't need, but kept lit anyway. The calm didn't last. The next day, we got ambushed. Wes had insisted we swing by the town square. Christmas market? He said. Not much, but they've got these cinnamon pecans that'll ruin your life. What he didn't mention was that every old high school classmate, neighbor, and gossip in a 3-county radius would also be there, armed with cell phones and smirks. I hadn't even finished my hot cider before someone cornered us. Mornin', Wes. The voice came from a tall guy with too perfect hair and an even more practiced smile. Didn't expect to see you two here. Wes stiffened. Cole. Cole. The name clicked. Harper's older brother, which made this guy public enemy number 1 if you were Wes Carter, trying to stay out of trouble. You know, there were bets you wouldn't show at the party last night, Cole went on, sipping from his own cup like this was just some neighborly catch-up. And then you roll in with a boyfriend? Big surprise. Wes didn't take the bait. Good to see you, Cole. Cole turned to me. And you are? Eli, I said, offering my hand. He ignored it. Funny. I don't remember you from high school. That's because I didn't go here. Right, he said slowly, eyes narrowing. So where'd you two meet again? Wes opened his mouth, but I beat him to it. College. We were roommates. Cole gave a little hum, like he was filing that away for later. Roommates. Of course. A few more fake pleasant comments, and then he walked off. I exhaled, tension draining out of me like air from a popped balloon. What was that? Cole's been itching to see me fail since I dumped his sister, Wes muttered, jaw tight. I frowned. Wait, I thought she left you. He hesitated. That's what people say, but it was mutual, more or less. Wes. She wanted something different, the kind of life I couldn't give her. I was trying to be what everyone expected, including her, and I realized I was faking more than just a smile. His voice was low now, barely above a whisper. I didn't want to marry someone just because we were supposed to, and I didn't want to keep pretending I was someone I'm not. I didn't say anything for a second, just stepped closer and slipped my hand into his. I'm proud of you. He gave me a sideways look. Even with all this mess? Especially because of it. That night, back at the ranch, we sat out under the stars in plastic lawn chairs that had seen better days, passing a flask between us while the cold bit at our cheeks. You ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't lost touch? I asked. All the time. I used to wonder what it would have been like if you'd kissed me back that night. He turned sharply. What night? You don't remember? He shook his head. Remind me. Our last night in the dorm. You were packing up your stuff. We split a six-pack and talked until 3 a.m. A slow recognition crept over his face. You leaned in, and I got scared, he said quietly. I wasn't ready. I thought if I kissed you, that'd be it, no turning back. I laughed, but it sounded more like a sigh. And now? He didn't answer. Just stood up, walked over to me, and dropped to one knee. Not like a proposal, but something just as vulnerable. Now I know there's nothing to turn back to. He kissed me again, slower this time, softer. The kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything, just gave. When he pulled away, he rested his forehead against mine. You're not just a distraction, Eli. You're the one I should have picked the first time. The days after the party blurred into each other, wrapped in a kind of quiet comfort I hadn't expected. There was something about Wes at home, on his land, in his element, that made him feel more honest. His edges softened, his smile lingered longer, and the way he looked at me, less guarded, like he wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. We fell into a routine, morning coffee, feeding the animals, long walks out past the fence line. He taught me how to hold a rope without embarrassing myself, and I taught him how to make decent carbonara without Googling it every time. And at night, we curled up on the couch like we'd always belonged there. But peace doesn't last forever. Not in stories like this. It was 2 days before I was supposed to fly back when the storm hit. Not the weather. That would have been easier. This storm wore jeans, a wool coat, and a smug expression. You don't have to answer that, I said, nodding toward the door when someone knocked during dinner. But Wes was already moving. He opened it, and there she stood, Harper. Can I come in? She asked, brushing snow off her shoulders. Wes stepped aside, stiff as a fence post. Nice place, she said, looking around like she was taking inventory. Always imagined what it looked like inside. Cut to the chase, Harper, Wes said. She smiled. Just wanted to see it for myself. The show you put on. Wes crossed his arms. You didn't come all this way to talk about my Christmas decorations. No, she admitted, turning to look at me. I came to ask if this thing you're doing is real. I opened my mouth, but Wes beat me to it. It is. She looked between us, searching for cracks. You always liked pretending, she said to him, voice lower now. Back then, when I'd ask you if everything was okay, you'd smile and say you were fine, even when I knew you weren't. Wes didn't argue. He just nodded. You were right. I wasn't fine. So why now? She asked, softer this time. Why him? Wes looked at me like he was seeing everything he'd been afraid to say out loud, because he's the first thing I've ever wanted that I didn't talk myself out of. That landed hard. Even Harper looked surprised. She nodded slowly. Okay. And just like that, she turned and left. Later, after we finished the leftover pie neither of us really touched, Wes spoke first. You don't have to stay. I looked up. What? I know that was a lot. I didn't mean to drag you into it. You didn't drag me into anything, Wes. I walked in. Still nothing, I said, standing up and walking over to him. Unless you're trying to give me an out. He didn't answer. You want me to go? I asked, heart thudding. No, he said finally. I want you to stay. Then stop trying to talk me out of it. He exhaled. Okay. I reached for his hand. You said I was the first thing you didn't talk yourself out of. He nodded. Good, because I'm not done with you yet. The morning I was supposed to leave, the world looked like it didn't want me to go. Snow had settled overnight, thick and untouched, blanketing everything in that quiet only winter can pull off. The trees were heavy with it, the roads half frozen, and Wes was standing in the doorway holding 2 mugs of coffee like he hadn't slept. You sure your flight's still on? He asked, handing me one. I took it, nodded, even though I hadn't checked. I didn't want to. We sat on the couch in silence, the kind of silence that stretches not because there's nothing to say, but because everything that matters is sitting heavy in the room. You've been quiet, he finally said. I stared at my mug. I'm thinking. About? What happens now? Wes leaned back, exhaling through his nose. I was afraid you'd say that. Wes, I live 2 states away. I have a job, a lease, a life that doesn't include cow manure and people who think, bless your heart, is a compliment. I know, he said, but I'm not asking you to throw all that away. I looked over at him, eyebrows raised. Then what are you asking? He didn't answer right away, just looked out the frosted window. You ever think about starting over? He asked. Like actually building something from scratch instead of just patching up the same life over and over again? I blinked. What are you talking about? I'm saying I want you to stay. Not forever. Not if you don't want that. But for a while. See where this goes. Give us a shot outside the spotlight, outside the pretending. It hit me then. He wasn't scared anymore. This was a man who used to swallow every real feeling he had and bury it under cowboy pride and small-town expectations. Now he was just laying it out. No ego, no defense. I stared at him, trying to remember the last time someone had actually asked me to stay. Not visit, not help, not pass through, but stay. You really mean that? I asked, voice quieter than I meant. He nodded. Yeah, I do. I called the airline. Delayed flight. Storms in the Midwest. They offered to reschedule me for 3 days later. I didn't ask him to. That night, Wes lit a fire and cooked us the worst steak I'd ever had, and I didn't say a word about it. We sat on the porch, wrapped in the same old flannel blanket, and talked about everything we'd never said in college, who we wanted to be, who we thought we had to be, and how damn long it took to realize we didn't have to be either. At some point, he took my hand. You think this is crazy? He asked. Completely. But? I looked over at him. But it feels like the first thing that's made sense in a long time. He smiled. Good, 'cause I kinda like you here. 3 days turned into a week. Then New Year's passed, and the twinkling lights on Main Street came down. But I was still at the ranch, still waking up to Wes bringing me coffee in mismatched mugs, and the sound of cows being significantly louder than anything I'd ever heard in Denver. It wasn't that we made a formal decision about me staying. We just didn't talk about me leaving. And somehow, that silence said everything. Wes kept going about his work like I'd always been there, like I was another part of his life that finally made sense. And I started to realize how long I'd been holding my breath in other people's spaces, how often I'd made myself smaller, more palatable, just to survive. But with him, I could just be. No edits, no second guessing. One evening, we were in the barn repairing a busted latch when Wes looked up and said, "Remember the first time we met?" I blinked. "Freshman year, you mistook me for the TA and asked if epistemology was a kind of pasta," he chuckled. "You were smug as hell. You were wearing a backwards hat and Crocs. Touché." He leaned against the stable door, wiping his hands on a rag. Back then, I thought I had everything figured out. Football, ranching, Harper, the whole cowboy dream. And now I know I was just scared. Scared of what I wanted, of what people would think if they knew. I looked at him, the golden light from the barn overhead soft on his face. "And what do you want now?" He didn't hesitate. "You. Here. A life with more than just land and tradition. I want something real." I stepped closer. "So do I." He kissed me then, not like a confession, not like an apology, but like he'd finally stopped running. It was a slow burn, building something with him. We didn't rush it. I took on remote freelance work, split time between the city and the ranch at first. But every time I went back to Denver, I found myself counting the days until I could return. Wes came out publicly without fanfare, just held my hand at the diner one morning and didn't let go when people looked. And honestly, most folks got over it faster than we expected. Sure, there were whispers, raised eyebrows, a few unsubtle Facebook posts from distant cousins, but the world didn't end. And more importantly, neither did we. One night in late spring, we were back on that porch, same blanket wrapped around us, same stars above. "I never thought this would be my life," I said. Yeah? Yeah. Falling for a cowboy? That wasn't in the plan. Wes smirked. Good, because I never liked plans much. I leaned into him, our shoulders touching. "So what do we call this?" He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Whatever we want." And I realized this wasn't just a story about faking it for a night. It was the beginning of the thing we never had words for in college. The thing that survived years. Distance. Fear. We didn't just steal the spotlight, we made our own.